Wow, do I have a fun video to talk about today. Personally, I believe this may be one of the best devices of the year, and it is the last folding device of the year. Today we're talking about the OnePlus Open. This year has been jam-packed with foldables finally. Competition instead than just one competitor in the US. We actually finally have some competition, and of course with competition that improves these devices. They're still really fairly new, especially the larger folding ones. The flip ones, for example, have basically got their form factor down to probably how they're going to stay, but the larger ones that fold open, maybe even fold open multiple times, are still in their infancy trying to figure out exactly the best processes from hinge to cameras to the screens that are used. And so it's great to actually see competition finally this year. Now we have Samsung, we have Google, and we have OnePlus in the game in the US. There are several other competitors outside the US that are making foldable phones, but for US we finally got some competition. And for OnePlus's first time into making a folding phone, wow, I'm hats off to them on the first time making a phone. I thought Google did a great job on their first iteration of a folding phone. You know, for example of where folding phones started with how bad the Z Fold 1 was breaking, I thought Google did a good job. But OnePlus's design and completion is definitely a step up from what Google created for its first gen. So let's get into specs. So the outside cover screen is a 6.3 inch screen that has a refresh rate from 20 to 120 hertz. It's not LTPO on the outside, so it doesn't drop all the way down to 1 refresh hertz, but it still has a high quality screen at 1440p, just like the internal screen. So you're not missing out really on anything on the external screen. And due to its width being wider than the competition slab phone width, I mean, if I compare it here to, let's say, a Pixel, we can see that they're almost identical in width. So it's very nice that you can get that more vertical and horizontal feeling that you typically get on a phone before opening and getting a great experience. The internal screen is a 7.82 inch internal screen that is LTPO and supports refresh rate from 1 to 120 hertz. So you're even getting more battery saving solutions on the internal screen or the main screen with the OnePlus. And one of its other big features is 2800 nits of brightness, and this actually goes for both the external and the internal. Now I've tested a 2400 nits phone now, which is the Google Pixel 8 Pro, and I was astonished with how bright that can get. I'm not seeing the same level of brightness out of this, so I'm not entirely sure how OnePlus got to that level. I think there's some things that it does with the auto and maybe the HDR that boost it up to that brightness at that point. But I think typically you're going to probably be more around the 18 to 2000 nits brightness. And because of them using a matte protective layer on the internal screen, you can see this screen out in the sun without a problem. The Pixel, after a while, I did really like that phone, but one of my biggest complaints was outside viewing in direct sunlight. It was almost nearly impossible. And the Z Fold is pretty good at this too, but it reflects as well, just like the Pixel. So it's very nice to see OnePlus fixing this problem as well by putting a matte film protector on the screen. And the other major improvement with this screen as opposed to some of the other folding phones is the crease as well. You can barely see this crease unless you're directly looking at it or have a black background or something. I mean, even just doing this where I am tilting it around, getting some bright lights and studio lights that shoot on it, I mean, we really can't still see it that much. I mean, unless you get a specific angle, it's definitely not something you can see near as much as the other phones. On to performance of the phone, which is, again, probably the best out of the three. It is a close toss-up with the Z Fold 5 because they are basically using the same processor, and Samsung has a little bit of advantage because they have an overclocked version that they built in unison with Snapdragon. So this is a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with 16 gig of RAM, which is a boost in RAM over the Z Fold, and 512 gig of storage. That is actually your only storage option. So you have plenty of space, and this is actually the only configuration option on this device, as opposed to your other phones that have 120 or 256 typically. Samsung does have a 1 terabyte option, I believe, as well, if I remember. But 512, there's no additional upcharge of $200 or 100, depends on the phone manufacturer, of that increased in storage. And 512 is great, even if you use your phone as a content creator like I do. And I typically use these folding phones for vertical videos just because I can frame myself, so it makes it really easy to use them. Even with 512 gig of space for that, apps, downloaded documents I sign, other work-related stuff, I still have plenty of space. So 512 is amazing that they included that as well. And of course, it is UFS 4.0 storage, so you'll get fast transfer speeds with that. Now let's talk about the connectivity for a moment, because that's another surprising place. This is a phone that supports Wi-Fi 7. Yes, a Wi-Fi 7 that just released, that's making a lot of news right now just because of the potential speeds you can have with Wi-Fi 7. Well, whenever you do upgrade your network to support Wi-Fi 7, this phone will be ready to take advantage of that. It also has Bluetooth 5.3, USB 3.1, even has a dual SIM slot. So if you are traveling globally, it is very nice to have that without having to switch out your SIMs. And of course, you still have eSIM as well. And this has 3 microphones in the device. And if you want to see or hear how that sounds, go check out this little short video I made about it. It's actually quite surprising how good the microphones are on this. I mean, that's not something that is typical of any smartphone, let alone a folding phone. It's amazing that they got that many packed into body, and the audio sounds great. And of course, the last thing regarding specs, your favorite part of this, is the cameras. The main sensor on the camera is a Sony LYT pixel super stacked 48 megapixel camera. So this is actually a relatively new sensor that uses some bending and layers basically to the glass to get that high pixel count and allow in more light. So it'll be very interesting to see over the course of this phone, you know, tweaks to the software, even at launch, how good the camera is as opposed to some of the folding phones. The other sensors are a telephoto lens that is 64 megapixel and supports an optical zoom of 3x. You can go digital zoom to 10x or even beyond that, even actually further than the super zoom on the S23 Ultra, but it isn't as good as that is, but you're still talking digital zoom, and so it kind of gets into more of a marketing gimmick or show off to your friends how far you can zoom in. It still looks pretty grainy, but it's there if you need it for something. And then of course there's an ultra wide sensor as well at 48 megapixel, and that also includes macro capabilities, so you can take those cool macro shots too. So just alone in these 3 cameras, we already have a very packed pixel dense feature set of cameras that also have the Hasselblad support behind it for tuning and color correction. And so we can see that there is great cameras in a folding phone finally. The Pixel, don't get me wrong, has good cameras as well, but they are the step down. They're like a Pixel 7 cameras. They're not the 7 Pro, they're not the 8 Pro. They're lower grade cameras because of the sheer limited size you can have to pack in these folding phones because of the so much going into the hinge and everything else to get it packed into such a small form factor, there isn't a lot of space. But OnePlus did it, and they got the best lenses in the business right now in a folding phone, for sure. But it doesn't end there. There's still 2 more cameras to this thing, just like most folding phones. There is the camera on the front of the cover screen for selfies. It is a 32 megapixel camera. And of course, there is one on the inside of the main display or internal screen at 20 megapixels. And it isn't an in-screen camera, so the quality is quite a bit better. So you can use this for your WebEx calls, your Zooms, or even your selfies and not look that bad. So with specs out of the way, I really want to get into more detail about this device and what makes it so great. So obviously one of the biggest things with folding phones is the crease. And the crease is always something that's noticeable. And kind of like I mentioned earlier, that's just something that always sticks out, but you get used to it. Or like the notch is on the iPhones, you get used to it. Well, OnePlus has done a great job in limiting that crease. It's still there. If you're in direct sunlight and get the lighting right, without the screen on, you can still see it. But it is significantly better than the Google Pixel Fold, and even still better than the Z Fold 5. And I think that just goes into all the dedication that OnePlus has done on this device to really eliminate some of these pain points that are with folding phones right now. And of course with that, they also worked on a hinge, and typically I believe the running parts for a hinge on folding phones is around 140, 150 parts. This hinge is only 69 parts. I don't know why they stopped at 69. Throw another 1 part in there, who knows why. I think we all know why they stopped at 69. But anyways, it's just amazing how much more they've packed in this hinge with so many more fewer parts, which helped reduce the overall footprint and allow them to focus on other things like cameras without taking up a lot of space. Now the hinge is a little different than some of your other stiff hinge folding phones you're used to. You don't have as many stop points in how the phone opens, but the other plus to that is it also snaps into place. And this actually, to me, feels like a more important thing than each of these little minuscule movements in the hinge to support odd angles. And the reason I say that is with folding phones, there is the worry of bending them too much. And I do feel like that was prominent with the Google Pixel, because you never got the full flat portion of the screen unless you bent it that last 2 degrees, which always felt a little concerning. Like, how long will that be able to hold up before we get a crack down the middle of the screen, basically, because you've bent it too much or too hard too often. So I like that the hinge snaps in place, and it gives a more comfortable feeling that the device is fully open. And it even makes it easier to close the device. Like OnePlus fashion, thankfully, they didn't drop this like they were about to or did for a year on the OnePlus Pro. Like 10, I think, is what they did this on. But the slider is here. And boy, is that nice to have. It's just a small thing that OnePlus has always done. It's always a great thing to have there, just to have an easy way to switch between volume and vibrate and mute quickly. What was something else that OnePlus improved over the other competitors? It's the boxing and what comes in the box. You get a charger, a cable, and a case all in the box, unlike the other ones. And that charger is a very fast 80-watt warp charger is what OnePlus calls it. But of course, one of the drawbacks of that is no wireless charging again. This is always something OnePlus hasn't really been a big fan of, is including wireless charging in it. Of course, the reasoning is, again, because of room, but if you've ever looked at the coil needed for a wireless charger, it is so thin. It's paper thin. So I would have taken the little bit of extra width to have the wireless charging. Now, with how fast the supercharge or warp charge is. Now, do I care since I don't have wireless charging and I have warp charging? No, I don't care, because I've gotten used to having the warp charging. Most people, when they need to top off or get battery fast, you're going to plug it in so that you can get the fastest charge. The only time the wireless charging comes into play is when maybe you're at the office or your desk or something, and you just want that slow trickle charge. But with how fast the warp charge is, I have no worries of how quick I can get my phone charged up. And I know for sure I can get my phone charged up faster than pretty much any other phone out there. And one of the other big things that OnePlus has done with their phone is a software solution called Open Canvas. This takes multitasking to the next level on folding phones. So typically we're used to, let's say on the Samsung devices, where you have split screen and then either a floating app or maybe a third app sectioned in a corner. Well, OnePlus, I personally feel, has the best solution for multitasking. And I really hope Google takes note to this, because they're actually the furthest behind, because the only thing that Pixel can do is 2 side-by-side apps. Hopefully this will be a feature drop, or Android 15 will natively support this more. But OnePlus has done a great job on the multitasking, because you technically have split screen, but then it puts off to the side a third app. And so you have this arrangement to where it's basically the size of a normal app or a normal phone, but 3 times. It's not a big deal that you can't see all 3 at once. You can still see a little sliver of the first app when you're over on the third one, but it gives you much more detail to see all of it, and much easier to move things around, swap locations of the apps, move content from one app to the other app. This is truly how multitasking should be done. And sometimes you'll have apps, or maybe just depending on how you want the layout to be, you could go 2 full apps and then 1 stacked below. And then so you could move down, look at that one app with full screen, then move back up, look at your Google Chrome and your email, and then go back to YouTube, for example. So it gives you a lot of multitasking flexibility as opposed to the other ones. I've always liked Samsung's iteration. The 3 apps where you had one in the corner and a floating one worked fine for me, but after experiencing Oxygen OS and Open Canvas, this is the best option for multitasking. And you even still get floating windows too. So you, depending on how you have the app set up, and if the apps can support that many open, you can actually have a floating window too. Or maybe you just want 2 regular split screen and a floating window. So OnePlus gives you a lot of options to figure out how you want to do multitasking. And one of the other great things that they offer is about the price. Folding phones are not cheap, but OnePlus has done something to combat that. So the starting price is $1,700, which is about $200 cheaper than the Fold or the Z Fold. So right there, that's nice. But they take it a step further by allowing you to trade in any device, and instantly get $200 off. Now, if you give them a better device like a previous iPhone model or a previous Z Fold, you're upwards to $600 or $800. And now you've got this thing down to a really reasonable price. And even if you don't have those devices to trade in, you're still going to probably be around $1,400, which makes it much more of a reasonable cost device and puts it in line with the iPhone Pro Max and the S23 Ultra. There's just so many advantages to this phone that make it the best folding phone you can get out there. And I really hope the competition takes note that there is a lot of good things that, oh, there's a good point I need to put in. Reason why OnePlus is doing so good at this is because their parent company, Oppo, has been at this for 3 years. So technically, this is the 3rd generation of a folding phone. But it's still OnePlus's technically first phone. But regardless, 1st generation or 3rd generation, the competition really needs to pay attention and take a lot of notes from how good this device is and start to catch up and make a compelling device for next year's folding phones. that's it in this one. If you have any questions, put them down below. I'm going to definitely be covering way more with this device. Hopefully there'll be more accessories to come out soon. There is not a lot for cases. I believe that's just because the OnePlus doesn't really give out their case design or their molds of the phone before they release, to kind of keep it a little bit more secret, especially this device. So hopefully we'll start seeing like the bigger name brands like speak and make cases for this in the coming months. So stay forward to that. I will definitely be covering more videos on this device, and I will see you in the next video.